You ever been told your dream was a waste of time? 12-year-old Marcus Johnson sat hunched over his desk in the back row of room 204, his pencil racing across the margins of his math worksheet like it had a mind of its own. The world around him faded, Mrs. Clark's voice, the scratch of chalk against the board, the sighs of classmates who'd already given up on understanding long division. For Marcus, all that noise was background to what truly mattered, getting the curve of the jawline just right, adding texture to the hoodie folds, the shadows under the eyes that made his character look a little older, a little wiser. He wasn't just doodling. He was building a world. A world where kids like him could fly, fight dragons, and be heard. Marcus. The voice snapped like a whip. He flinched. Mrs. Clark stood at the front of the class, arms folded, lips pressed in that thin, teacher-disappointed kind of way. The room went quiet. I said, Marcus, are you with us, or are you off in fantasy land again? A few kids snickered. Marcus tried to slide the sketchbook back under his worksheet, but it was too late. Mrs. Clark was already walking toward him. She snatched the drawing right off his desk. A superhero, mid-leap, fists glowing, eyes fierce. A city crumbling in the background. It was electric, alive. But she held it like it was a crumpled napkin from lunch. Again, she said, holding it up for the class to see. This is math class, not art club. How many times do we have to go through this? Marcus wanted to sink into the floor. His fingers curled into fists on his lap. Mrs. Clark shook her head. You think this is gonna get you anywhere? Drawing superheroes during division time. Do you want to grow up and work at a comic book store your whole life? More laughter. Some kids looked down, uncomfortable. Others watched like it was a show. I'm calling your mother. You can take your art and your attitude to the hallway. Maybe out there you'll learn what priorities look like. Marcus stood up slowly, trying not to let her see the way his jaw trembled. As he walked out, his sketchbook still clenched in his hands, he heard her mutter, every year, there's always one. The hallway was silent except for the distant rumble of a vending machine. Marcus slumped onto the bench outside room 204. He stared down at his sketchbook, his safe place, now tainted by embarrassment. His hands were still shaking. A lump formed in his throat, but he forced it down. Boys in his neighborhood didn't cry over words. Especially not in school hallways where anyone could walk by and see. He flipped the page. Fresh. Blank. Safe. And still, the pencil moved. He drew without thinking, a boy in a hoodie, standing under a spotlight, shadows stretching behind him like monsters. The words Mrs. Clark had thrown at him spun around the edges of the page, waste of time, off in fantasy land, not gonna get you anywhere. He shaded harder. Darker. Deeper. Maybe she was right. Maybe drawing was pointless. Maybe. Yo. That her again? Marcus looked up. Elijah, tall and skinny with a half-buttoned shirt and one broken shoelace, leaned against the lockers. Marcus nodded once, not trusting his voice. Elijah grinned. Man, she's been mad at you since the first week. What was it that time, math again? She said I was wasting time. Again, Marcus said, his voice low. Elijah sat beside him. What she doesn't get. You see stuff the rest of us don't. That ain't a waste. That's a superpower. Marcus let out a short laugh, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Elijah glanced at the sketchbook. Let me see. Marcus handed it over. Elijah stared for a moment, then gave a low whistle. This one. This one's fire. You made those shadows look like they're alive, man. Marcus shrugged. Doesn't matter. No one cares about this stuff. She's probably right. I should stop. Elijah handed the book back. Don't even say that. You stop drawing, you stop being you. They sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that wasn't heavy or awkward, just honest. Then Elijah nudged him. Hey. You know what'd be sick? You finish that whole sketchbook and then make copies. Like a real comic book. I'd read that. Marcus's eyes lit up, just for a second. Then he looked down again. No one would buy it. Yeah. Elijah leaned back with a grin. You don't need everyone. You just need the right someone. Later that day, Marcus sat in the principal's office, legs swinging off the edge of the plastic chair. His mother sat beside him, lips pressed tight, one hand clutching her purse like it was about to fly away. Mrs. Clark stood across from them, arms folded again. He's talented, yes, she admitted. But talent means nothing without discipline. He refuses to follow directions. He's disruptive. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. No point. His mom looked at him, disappointment clouding her face. Marcus, you're better than this. But he started. No buts, she said sharply. You're not in school to draw pictures. You're there to learn. To make something of yourself. Marcus wanted to scream, I am. This is me making something. But instead, he nodded. Because that's what you did when nobody believed in your dream but you. That night, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table with a bowl of cereal for dinner and a stack of math worksheets in front of him. His sketchbook lay closed beside them, untouched. He could still hear Mrs. Clark's voice in his head. And his mother's. And Elijah's. You stop drawing, you stop being you. He opened the sketchbook. The superhero on the page stared back at him, mid-leap, fists glowing, still ready to save the world. Marcus picked up his pencil. And he started drawing again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marcus didn't remember the first time he picked up a pencil, just that it felt right. It wasn't something anyone taught him. No big moment. No special gift handed down through generations. It was more like breathing. Like the way his mom hummed while cooking or how the train rattled past their apartment at exactly 6:47 every night. Drawing was just there. Always had been. His mom said he started sketching on napkins when he was 3. Faces, mostly. Big round eyes, crooked mouths. As he got older, he'd draw on anything he could find, cereal boxes, old bills, even the back of the church bulletins on Sundays. If there was a blank surface, it was fair game. But South Side Chicago wasn't exactly an art gallery. Marcus grew up in a crumbling apartment building on 63rd and Wentworth, right above a corner store that never closed and never cleaned. The walls were thin, and the neighbors loud. His mom, Cassandra, worked the graveyard shift at the hospital and cleaned offices part-time during the day. She came home smelling like bleach and exhaustion. They didn't have much. One couch, one small TV, one bathroom they shared with roaches. But they had a routine. And routines, Marcus learned early, were how people like them stayed afloat. He always kept his pencils in a shoebox. It was a busted-up Nike box, covered in stickers and scribbles, but it was sacred. He'd carry it around the apartment like it held diamonds. In a way, it did. When the nights got too loud, gunshots echoing, neighbors fighting, sirens flashing red through the blinds, Marcus would curl up on the floor with his sketchbook and draw. Not what he saw, but what he wanted to see. Bright skies. Laughing faces. Superheroes with capes stitched from struggle. Because the real world was gray. But Marcus saw it in color. His mom never discouraged him directly, but she never encouraged him either. Art was a hobby. A distraction. Something you did after you finished your homework, your chores, your prayers. She didn't understand how drawing could be anything more than a phase. Especially not for a black boy in a neighborhood where survival was already a full-time job. "You gonna draw your way outta here?" she'd scoff when she found scraps of drawings under the couch. Marcus never answered. Mostly because he wasn't sure if the answer was yes or no. Only that it was the only thing that made him feel whole. One day, when he was 8, she threw out a whole stack of his sketches by accident, or so she said. He found them buried under coffee grounds and chicken bones, ruined by grease and garbage juice. He didn't cry. He just stared at the trash for a long time and said nothing. That night, he drew until his fingers cramped. And he hit every page after that. School was never his thing. Not because he wasn't smart, he was. But classrooms felt like cages. He hated the beige walls, the fluorescent lights, the rules that didn't make sense. He'd sit through lessons staring out the window, imagining alien planets and floating cities. Most teachers didn't notice. Or didn't care. Except Mrs. Clark. She noticed everything. She was strict, sharp-tongued, and old school. She believed in structure, obedience, and bubble test scores. Anything outside that box was a threat to control. Marcus was a threat. But even with her breathing down his neck, he couldn't stop drawing. It was the only place he felt free. There was one spot in the neighborhood Marcus loved more than anywhere else, the old train yard, 3 blocks from his apartment. It was abandoned. Fenced off. Tagged with years of graffiti, layers of color battling for space. Most kids were too scared to hang there, but Marcus saw beauty in the broken bricks and rusted tracks. That's where he first met Elijah. Elijah had a spray can in one hand and a busted speaker in the other. Tall, wiry, and always smiling like he knew something you didn't. He wore mismatched sneakers and pants that never quite fit right. "Yo," Elijah said, the first time they locked eyes. "You the kid who draws ghosts on trash cans?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "They're not ghosts. They're soul travelers." Elijah stared, then burst out laughing. "That's weird, man. I like it." From that moment on, they were inseparable. Elijah wasn't an artist the way Marcus was, but he had an eye. He could see what Marcus saw, or at least, he tried to. They'd hang in the train yard for hours, sketching, spraying, layering color over color like they were painting hope onto the ruins. One day, Elijah said something Marcus never forgot. "People around here, they see broken. But you see possible." Marcus smiled for real that time. At night, he'd lie in bed and draw until he couldn't keep his eyes open. One hand holding the pencil, the other holding a flashlight under the blanket. Sometimes, he'd imagine what life might be like if people actually cared about his drawings. If someone, anyone, looked at them and saw what he saw. Other times, he'd imagine flying. Not like Superman. But like a boy too fast for pain to catch. On Marcus's 12th birthday, his mom gave him a gift wrapped in the comics section of the newspaper. Inside was a brand new sketch pad. Thick pages. No lines. Just blank space. She didn't say much. Just handed it to him, looked away, and said, "Don't waste it." That was the closest she ever came to saying she believed. Marcus didn't waste it. He filled that sketchpad faster than any before. Characters poured out of him, warriors, queens, kids who glowed in the dark. It was like something inside him had finally unlocked. That sketchpad became his secret weapon. His anchor. And when the day came that Mrs. Clark ripped it out of his hands and told him his dreams were foolish, it hit like a punch to the chest. But Marcus wasn't new to being overlooked. He'd lived his whole life in the shadows. And still, he kept seeing color. On Saturday mornings, while other kids in the building played video games or slept in, Marcus was always up early, hunched over the kitchen table with a handful of stubby crayons and half a cup of cold cereal. It wasn't that he was a morning person. He just knew those early hours were sacred. That brief, golden slice of peace before the building woke up, before the hallway argument started, before his mom came home from her overnight shift and filled the apartment with tension. He liked the quiet. He liked the way the morning light hit the chipped linoleum floor, making it feel like a movie scene if you squinted just right. Today, he was working on a new piece, a city floating in the sky, held up by balloons the size of houses. Little people climbed ropes from the earth, trying to reach it. He liked the way it felt. Like maybe, just maybe, there was a way out. He was shading in the shadows of a balloon when the door swung open hard. Cassandra Johnson stood in the doorway, hair wrapped in a scarf, eyes heavy with exhaustion. She didn't even put her keys down before noticing the mess on the table: crayons, paper scraps, open peanut butter jar. "You got dishes in the sink and this is what you're doing," she said, setting her purse on the counter with a thump. Marcus looked up. "I was just finishing." "Don't just me, Marcus," she snapped. "I asked you to clean this kitchen last night. You got time to draw cities in the sky, but you can't wipe down a counter." He stood slowly, trying not to sigh. "Sorry. You always sorry. Sorry, don't mop floors." She rubbed her temples and let out a breath. "Lord help me, I don't know what to do with you. I'm working 2 jobs, coming home bone-tired, and every time I turn around, you got a new stack of cartoons about kids flying through space or whatever this is." "It's not cartoons," he muttered. She froze. "Excuse me?" Marcus swallowed hard. "They're not cartoons. They're stories. Worlds. Stuff that matters." She looked at him for a long beat. Then she laughed, not out of humor, but something sharper. "What matters is keeping the lights on. What matters is not ending up like your cousin Malik with a record before 17. You wanna draw? Fine. But you better learn how to do that after you finish real responsibilities." He stared at her. "But what if drawing is the responsibility?" Cassandra shook her head. "Art don't pay rent, Marcus. I ain't raising no starving artist in my house." She grabbed the sketchbook off the table, flipping through it roughly. "What is this, huh? What's this supposed to do for you? You gonna take this to college admissions? Hand it to a job interview? What, they gonna pay you in crayons?" "Give it back," Marcus said, his voice rising. Cassandra stared at him, not angry now, but something worse. Disappointed. "I didn't raise you to live in a fantasy." She dropped the sketchbook on the table and walked to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. That night, Marcus didn't draw. He just lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of the neighbor's TV and the wind pushing against the cracked windows. The sketchbook sat next to him, but he didn't open it. Not because he didn't want to, but because he was afraid. Afraid that maybe she was right. Afraid that he'd never make it. Afraid that no matter how hard he drew, the world wouldn't care. Sunday afternoon, Elijah showed up with a new can of spray paint and an idea. "There's a brick wall behind the old liquor store," he said, bouncing on his heels. "Whole thing's blank. It's basically begging for a masterpiece." Marcus hesitated. "I don't know, man." "What? You sick? My mom's on me. Says I gotta stop wasting time." Elijah rolled his eyes. "Dude. You know what's a waste of time? Watching cable news. Arguing on Facebook. We're building stuff. That ain't a waste." "She doesn't see it that way." Elijah tossed him a can. "Then maybe she ain't looking hard enough." The wall was perfect, wide, smooth, untouched. They worked for hours. Elijah did the bold outlines. Marcus filled in the details: faces of people flying with wings made of books, kids reaching toward stars shaped like musical notes, roots growing into skyscrapers. It was more than a mural. It was a statement. A dream pinned to brick. By sunset, they stepped back, sweaty and covered in paint, staring up at their work like it was a window into another world. And for a moment, Marcus felt whole. Then came the sirens. 2 squad cars. Lights flashing. Someone had called them in. Elijah cursed under his breath. We should run. Marcus stood frozen. One of the officers stepped out. You two responsible for this? Elijah puffed up. It's art. It's vandalism, the officer said flatly. Hands where I can see them. Marcus raised his hands, his heart pounding. They weren't arrested, but the officers took their names and warned them about property damage and probation. They made them promise not to come back. As they walked home in silence, Marcus's mind raced. What would his mom say? What if this went on his record? What if? You know, Elijah said suddenly, they acted like we robbed a bank. Marcus let out a bitter laugh. They couldn't see it, he said. They didn't even look. When he got home, his mom was waiting. She'd heard. From the officer. From the school. From the building gossip line. There was no yelling this time. Just silence. Heavy. Sharp. I told you, she said quietly. I told you what that mess would bring. He wanted to say something. Anything. But all he could do was nod. Later that night, when the house was quiet and his mom had gone to sleep, Marcus sat in the bathroom with the light off, door cracked just enough to let in a sliver of hallway glow. He opened his sketchbook. On a fresh page, he drew a kid standing in front of a wall, spray can in hand, while shadows tried to pull him back. Above the kid's head, he wrote one word in big, cracked letters. Enough? But when he looked at it again, he added something underneath. Smaller. Louder. Not yet. Elijah was the kind of friend who showed up when nobody else would. When Marcus's sketchbook was taken away again in class, Elijah had slipped him a stack of printer paper he stole from the school office. When Marcus had to walk home in the rain after detention, Elijah was already waiting for him under the awning, 2 hot chips and a Capri Sun in hand. He didn't always have the right words, but he always showed up. That mattered more than Marcus could say out loud. One Friday afternoon, as they walked home along the rusted tracks behind their building, Elijah kicked a rock down the path and said, You ever think about showing your stuff to someone real? Marcus glanced at him. What's that mean? Like, a pro. Somebody who can get you in a gallery or something. Not just walls behind liquor stores. Marcus shook his head. No one's gonna care about my sketchbook, bro. Not unless it's on fire. Man, that's dumb, Elijah said. Your stuff's crazy good. Like, put it on a shirt and sell it, good. Marcus laughed, but there was an ache in it. No one's buying shirts from some kid on 63rd with peanut butter on his shoes. Elijah didn't laugh. I'm serious, he said. There's this community center off Halsted. They got an open mic next Friday. Poetry, music, live art. You could draw something on the spot. People clap, you pass a hat. Maybe even make a few bucks. Marcus looked skeptical. Like, live? While people watch? Yeah, why not? I'll be there. I'll even hype you up. The idea made Marcus's stomach twist. Not fear, exactly. Just that deep, crawling nervousness that came from being seen. Really seen. What if they don't get it? He asked quietly. Elijah grinned. Then we leave. But what if they do? That stuck with him. What if they do? They spent the whole week planning. Elijah made flyers on a school computer, even though they got in trouble for using up color ink. Marcus picked out his cleanest hoodie, sharpened every pencil he owned, and practiced for hours at the train yard. They decided on a piece called Flight Plan, a kid building wings out of newspapers, launching himself off a rooftop made of words like poverty, doubt, and fear. Marcus liked it. It felt like truth. The night of the show, the community center buzzed with life. Kids rapped over dusty beats. Someone read a poem about heartbreak. A girl played guitar like she had nothing left to lose. Then came Marcus's turn. He stepped onto the small, makeshift stage. Just him, a sketchpad on an easel, and 30 strangers watching. His hand shook a little, but the moment he touched pencil to page, everything else vanished. He sketched the outline first, a city skyline behind a boy mid-jump. The wings came next, huge and stitched together, feathers made of headlines and slashes of red. The crowd was quiet. Then someone whispered, "Yo." Another said, "That's cold." When he finished, they clapped. Some loud. Some polite. But it was real. Marcus stood there, stunned. For the first time, people were reacting to his art with something other than scolding or silence. Elijah bounced up, grinning. "See? Told you. You just needed the right room." They made $12 in the donation cup. It wasn't much. But it felt like $1 million. They kept going back. Week after week, Marcus drew at the open mic. People started remembering his name. A guy from a local nonprofit asked if he wanted to paint a mural in the youth center basement. A spoken word artist asked if he'd ever illustrated poetry before. It was small. But it was real. And for the first time in his life, Marcus started to believe maybe, just maybe, his drawings had weight. Then, one day, things shifted. It started with a flyer Elijah brought to school. "Yo," he said, slapping it on Marcus's locker. "Check this out. Citywide Youth Arts Competition. $5,000 grand prize. Feature at the Chicago Youth Art Expo." Marcus stared. "That's a real contest." "Yeah, bro. Winner gets a scholarship, too. I talked to the guy running it, he said you can submit digital scans if you don't got a portfolio." Marcus swallowed. "You think I should do it?" Elijah grinned. "You have to." They spent every afternoon for a week scanning Marcus's best work at the library. They edited them, formatted them, even wrote a short artist statement. Marcus turned it in 2 days before the deadline. And waited. A week later, an email came through on Elijah's cousin's phone. Subject line, "Finalists announced." Marcus held his breath as they scrolled. Then Elijah shouted, "UIN. You're in, bro. Finalist." Marcus blinked. "What? You're in. Finalist. That means you're gonna have your work at the expo next month. This is it, man." Marcus didn't know whether to cry or throw up. He was going to be seen. For real. But not everyone was happy. His mom found out from a neighbor whose daughter had seen the flyer at school. "You skipped homework to draw pictures for some contest," she said sharply that night. "It's not just pictures, Ma. I'm a finalist. They're putting my work in a gallery downtown." She paused, dish towel in hand, staring at him like he was speaking another language. "You think that's gonna feed you?" "It could. There's a scholarship. $5,000. That ain't real money," she snapped. "That's maybe money. Dream money. And dream money don't pay bills." Marcus felt like the air had been knocked out of him. "But, it means something," he whispered. "Not in this house, it don't," she said coldly. And just like that, the color left the room. The night before the expo, Marcus didn't sleep. He kept staring at the flyer, then at his reflection in the window. He had one person in his corner. One person who always believed. But when he showed up the next morning to catch the train downtown, Elijah wasn't there. Marcus waited. And waited. He called 3 times. No answer. Elijah never showed. He went to the expo alone. Stood by his work in silence while strangers passed by and nodded politely. He smiled. But it wasn't real. That night, he finally heard from Elijah. "Sorry, man," the message read. Stuff came up. No explanation. No call. Just 5 words. Marcus stared at the screen. And for the first time in a long time, he felt alone. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, phone still in his hand, staring at Elijah's message like it was written in a foreign language. Stuff came up. That was it. No explanation. No apology that felt like he meant it. Just 5 words, 5 tiny words that cracked open something Marcus didn't know could break. He read the message again. Then again. Then once more, hoping it would say something different the next time. It didn't. He didn't write back. Not that night. Not the next day. The expo had come and gone. People had admired his work. A few had complimented him, inspiring, raw, real. Someone had even asked for his Instagram. But it didn't feel like a win. Because Elijah wasn't there. Because his mom didn't ask how it went. Because it felt like the moment he'd waited for all his life, and no one who mattered had showed up to see it. At school, Elijah tried to act like nothing happened. "Yo, my bad, bro," he said Monday morning, leaning on Marcus's locker like it was all cool. "My uncle needed a ride to Joliet. Whole thing was last minute. I wanted to call, but my phone died." Marcus just nodded, shoving his books into his bag. "You did good though, right?" Elijah asked, his voice light. "I saw the pics online. Your piece looked fire." Marcus closed the locker without looking at him. Yeah. That was it. No anger. No blow-up. Just, cold. The kind of cold that comes when something dies quietly. Days passed. Then a week. They still talked. Kind of. They still saw each other at school. Walked the same streets. Shared jokes sometimes. But something had shifted. Marcus started keeping his sketchbook to himself again. Started spending more time in the library than at the train yard. He stopped drawing in public. Stopped showing Elijah his newest pieces. Not out of spite. But because it hurt too much to keep offering pieces of yourself to someone who didn't show up when it counted. At home, things weren't much better. His mom had gone quiet, too. Not in a peaceful way, in that smothering way where everything you say feels like an interruption. Every question feels like a burden. She didn't ask about the scholarship. Didn't mention the expo. Didn't even glance at the flyer still taped to the fridge. All she saw was that his grades had slipped. "Math, Marcus," she said one night, holding his progress report like it was a diagnosis. "You got a C- in math." "I was busy," he muttered. "Busy drawin'," she snapped. "You think some art show's gonna cover rent when you flunk out of school?" It was one test. It was 3. And I ain't gonna be the mother of some dropout sketchin' on corners for tips. That ain't happenin', dot. He looked up at her. "You didn't even come to the expo." Her jaw tensed. "I had work." "Yeah, like always." Silence. Then she turned back to the dishes. "This world don't care about your feelings, Marcus. Only what you bring to the table." He stared at her back. "Then maybe I need a new table." She didn't turn around. Didn't say another word. But something in the room shifted. And for the first time, Marcus didn't feel like her son. He felt like her disappointment. He started walking home the long way after school. Not to avoid anyone, just to think. That's when he found it. The wall. The one behind the old store where they'd painted Flight Plan, now covered in white paint. Clean. Scrubbed. Erased. Gone. The Kid with the Wings. The City of Hope. Every line, every color, gone like it had never existed. Just white space. Marcus stood in front of it, stunned. Breath caught in his throat. He took out his phone and scrolled to the picture he'd taken months ago, the mural in full color, Elijah beside it with a goofy grin. He stared at the screen. Then locked it and walked away. That night, he couldn't sleep. He flipped through his sketchbook, page by page, and saw a trail of moments, his first open mic piece, the Expo finalist entry, a quick drawing of Elijah laughing, a sketch of his mom sleeping on the couch. All of them real. All of them distant now. He picked up a pencil and stared at the page. Then, slowly, began to draw. This time, it was a boy in the center of a crowd, faceless figures surrounding him. All of them reaching, not to help, but to pull. Words swirled in the margins. Loyalty. Doubt. Silence. Rage. At the bottom, he wrote. The ones who say nothing hurt the most. The next morning, Marcus left for school early. He walked past Elijah at the corner and didn't stop. Didn't nod. Didn't say a word. And Elijah? He didn't follow. Didn't call out. Didn't ask why. Maybe because he already knew. But what Marcus didn't know yet, what he couldn't know, was that sometimes silence isn't betrayal. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes the people who love you the most are just as scared of your light as the people who try to dim it. And that realization, that would come later. After the next storm. The first time Marcus walked past the building on 51st and Wabash, he didn't even notice it. It was just another brick box with faded paint and an old awning half torn off. Sandwiched between a check cashing place and a beauty supply shop, it looked more like a forgotten storage unit than a space worth entering. But the second time, something pulled at him. It was the mural. Half done, faded at the edges, but bold. A swirl of faces and colors that seemed to breathe right off the wall. It wasn't polished. Wasn't perfect. But it was alive. Marcus stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, staring. The detail in the eyes. The way the lines moved like music. It didn't just speak, it shouted. He stepped closer, hand hovering over the rough texture of the wall, like maybe, if he touched it, he'd understand something. You like it? The voice came from behind. Marcus turned fast, half startled. A man in his late 30s leaned against the open doorway, arms crossed, paint on his jeans, a scruffy beard covering half his tired face. Marcus didn't answer right away. I just, never saw anything like that. Not here. The man gave a half smile. Most people don't look up long enough to notice. Marcus looked back at the wall. Who painted it? The man stepped forward, wiping his hands on a rag. Started it 5 years ago. Never finished. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Why not? The man shrugged. Life got busy. Then it got messy. But it's still here. He extended a hand. Name's Darius. I run the art studio inside. Used to be a barbershop, back when the South Side still had dreams. Marcus blinked. You run a studio here? Why not? Darius smirked. You don't have to wear a suit to create something that changes the world. Inside, it was chaos. Canvases stacked in corners. Old milk crates filled with paintbrushes. A workbench covered in half-finished sculptures and dried paint tubes. It smelled like dust and acrylic and something warm, like wood and potential. Darius walked toward the back, motioning for Marcus to follow. You draw. Marcus hesitated. Kinda. Darius shot him a look over his shoulder. Kinda means yes, but you don't want me to see it. He opened a drawer, pulled out a clipboard, and handed Marcus a waiver. Open studio hours. No fee, no judgment. Only rule is, respect the space. Marcus took the clipboard slowly. You don't charge. Darius shook his head. Not for folks who need it. Why? 'Cause someone didn't charge me. And because if we wait for the world to give us permission, we'll be old before we ever make anything worth keeping. That line hit Marcus like a punch to the chest. He didn't know what to say. So he didn't say anything. Just nodded. Then pulled his sketchbook from his backpack. Darius looked through the pages, one by one, his eyes scanning fast but sharp. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked up. You're not kinda good, he said. You're really good. You just don't believe it yet. Marcus swallowed hard. Most people don't care. Most people ain't looking. That's different. He started coming to the studio every day after school. At first, just to watch. Then to draw. Then to experiment. Darius gave him charcoal sticks, new brushes, paints he'd never used. Taught him how to stretch a canvas. How to layer colors. How to tell a story with light. He never hovered. Never preached. He just made space. Sometimes, that's all a kid needs. Marcus didn't tell anyone. Not Elijah. Not even his mom. It felt like a secret that needed time to breathe. Like a seed that couldn't survive too much noise too early. And Darius didn't push. He let Marcus create. Let him fail. Let him figure things out. You don't have to be loud to be powerful, Darius said once, while painting the underlayers of a portrait. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who build whole worlds when no one's looking. Marcus didn't know if he was talking about the painting, or him. Maybe both. One afternoon, Darius brought out a weathered portfolio. These, he said, laying them out on the table, were my pieces from college. Back when I thought I was gonna make it big. The art was incredible. Raw. Vibrant. Screaming with emotion. You could have made it, Marcus said, stunned. Darius chuckled, low and dry. Could've. Should've. Life got complicated. Bills. Family. A million reasons. But I'm still painting. That's the win. He looked Marcus dead in the eye. But you got time. Don't waste it. That night, Marcus walked home differently. Lighter. He had paint under his nails and a new sketch in his pocket. It wasn't perfect. Wasn't even finished. But it was his. He passed the spot where flight plan used to be and didn't flinch this time. Because now he knew, walls could be painted again. Dreams could be rebuilt. And silence? Silence didn't mean it was over. It just meant something new was starting. The call came out of nowhere. Marcus had just finished a piece of abstract work he'd been tinkering with for the last week, layers of deep blues, blacks, and purples that swirled and collided like the storm inside his chest. He hadn't planned on showing it to anyone, but somehow, Darius had found it the moment it dried. You got something here, Darius said, eyeing the piece over his shoulder. Might be just what a client needs. A client? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who? Darius paused, studying the painting. A local gallery. A couple of business owners looking for something to hang in their new space. I'm gonna pitch it. You in? Marcus swallowed hard. Wait, you want me to sell this? Darius nodded. It's not just about selling art. It's about having people see it. You've got a voice, Marcus. It's time to use it. The pitch happened a few days later. Marcus was sitting in Darius's tiny office at the back of the studio, staring at a laptop screen while Darius talked to a pair of well-dressed men who looked like they'd come straight from a board meeting. Trust me, Darius was saying. This kid's got talent. Raw. Real. He's got something you won't see anywhere else. The work speaks for itself. One of the men, a short, balding guy with sharp eyes, turned to Marcus. "Let's see it." The words felt like an avalanche. Marcus fumbled with his phone, pulling up a picture of his abstract piece. He didn't know what to expect, whether they'd like it, hate it, or just ignore it. The man took the phone, squinting at the image. "This is different," he said slowly, tapping the screen. "I like it." "You like it?" Marcus asked, trying not to sound too shocked. The man nodded. "Yeah. I can see this in a high-end space. Modern, bold. It has energy." Darius stepped in. "What about the price?" The man hesitated for a second, looking at his colleague. "How much do you want for it?" Marcus felt his heart race. I don't know." Darius leaned over, whispering in his ear. "Start high. You can always negotiate down." Marcus took a deep breath. $2,000. The man raised an eyebrow. 2,000. For this piece. Marcus braced himself for the inevitable rejection, but Darius cut in. "It's worth it," he said firmly. "We'll throw in a couple of smaller works to seal the deal." The other man thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. We'll take it. Let's work out the details." Marcus stood there, stunned. The deal was made. And with it, a whole new reality had just opened up to him. He couldn't sleep that night. $2,000. For a painting he almost didn't finish. For something he had created on a whim. The numbers spun in his head like a whirlwind. The next morning, he showed up at the studio early, trying to focus on the next project. But his mind kept drifting. His first real sale. What did it mean? What did he do with this money? And what about the pressure? What if the next piece wasn't good enough? "Hey," Darius said, catching Marcus staring at an empty canvas. "What's up?" Marcus shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around it. "I don't know, man. What if they hate the piece when they see it in person? What if it's not enough?" Darius leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "You know why they picked it? 'Cause it's honest. It's you. The second you start making art for them, instead of for yourself, that's when you lose." Marcus nodded, but the doubt lingered. Days passed. The commission became real. Darius helped him pack the painting, and the gallery set up a viewing space with a spotlight to showcase it. The opening night was packed with strangers in suits and dresses, sipping wine and mingling under the soft lighting. Marcus didn't know anyone there. But they all stared at his painting. He stood in the back of the room, nervous. His palms were sweaty, his shirt sticking to his back. He barely touched the wine glass in his hand, afraid that if he took a sip, he might spill it all over the artwork. Then a woman in a tailored dress walked by. She stopped in front of the piece and stared for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Marcus held his breath. Finally, she turned to him, her lips curling into a smile. "This is yours." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah." She tilted her head, eyes studying the work. "It's powerful. It makes you feel something. That's rare these days." The compliment hit him hard, but in a good way. He wasn't sure if it was the wine talking or the fact that a stranger, someone he'd never met, had just validated his art. But he smiled. "Thanks," he said, still processing the words. And just like that, he was no longer just the kid who doodled in the back of his class. He was an artist. Someone people chose to see. The sale closed later that night. He didn't even see the money transfer to his account until the next morning. $2,000. Just like that. Marcus didn't spend a penny of it. Not yet. Instead, he stared at the notification on his phone, feeling both thrilled and terrified. This was it. The first step. But as much as he wanted to celebrate, Marcus knew something that couldn't be ignored: this was just the beginning. His work was out there now. People were seeing it. But with that came more pressure, more expectations. More challenges. And worse, he had to decide what kind of artist he wanted to be. Was he willing to keep painting for others? Or would he lose himself in the process? Marcus sat in front of his canvas, staring at the blank white space. The glow of the studio lights felt too harsh, the quiet too loud. He'd been here for hours, and yet nothing. No strokes of inspiration. No ideas flowing. Just silence. His phone buzzed. Another email from the gallery, another client asking for a commission. The pressure was mounting. People wanted his art. They were willing to pay for it. They wanted more of it. But the more they wanted, the more he began to question what he was doing. Was he creating art? Or was he just fulfilling orders? He glanced at the painting he had finished for the gallery. The one that sold for $2,000. It felt like it belonged to someone else now. Not to him. The color felt off. The lines too perfect. The energy wasn't there anymore. The weight of the world felt heavy on his shoulders, and it wasn't the world that had made the weight, it was his own damn mind. Marcus. Darius's voice rang out from the hallway. Marcus didn't look up. He kept his eyes trained on the canvas, his brush poised but unmoving. Marcus, you okay? He didn't answer right away. How could he? Finally, he muttered, "Yeah, just thinking." Darius stepped into the studio, his shoes tapping lightly on the floor as he made his way over. "You've been sitting here for hours, man. What's up?" "I don't know. I just feel lost," Marcus admitted, his voice low. Darius raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe. "Lost? You've been getting commissions left and right. People love your stuff. Hell, you sold your first painting for $2,000. I'd say you're finding something." Marcus shook his head, frustration building. "It's not enough. They want me to make the same thing over and over, and I can't. I don't want to." Darius studied him for a long moment. "You're not just making art to make money, are you?" "I don't know what I'm doing anymore," Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. The first painting was real. It came from somewhere. But now, it's like I'm just doing this because they're paying me to. Darius took a deep breath. "Art isn't just about making a living, Marcus. If you lose the why, then you'll just be a factory. And trust me, that's a slippery slope." Marcus stared at his hands. He felt like they didn't belong to him. He'd spent years drawing and sketching just because it felt right. Just because he loved it. And now? Now it felt like he was trapped. The next day, the pressure only grew. Another commission. Another meeting. More emails flooding in. The requests were coming from everywhere: high-end restaurants, boutique hotels, office buildings. People wanted his work. They wanted it now. But every time Marcus picked up his brush, it felt like the color was duller. The strokes didn't come naturally. He could feel the weight of expectation, the pressure to create something that would sell, something that would please the clients. But his heart wasn't in it. One evening, Darius stopped by the studio again. "You've been putting in some serious hours, man. What's going on?" "I don't know," Marcus said, throwing his brush down in frustration. "I feel like I'm just chasing the money now. Every piece I finish feels like it's not mine. Like I'm giving away bits of myself, and I don't know how much more I have to give." Darius nodded slowly, sitting down across from Marcus. "Yeah. That's the thing, man. Once you start making art for someone else, you lose yourself in the process. You're no longer painting for you. You're painting for them." "Then what do I do?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "You remember why you started, Darius said quietly. When you put that first piece out into the world, that was you. It wasn't for anyone else. You painted it because it had to be made. You need to find that again. The money and the commissions. They're not the goal. They're just the consequence of you staying true to what you do. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Marcus cut back on the commissions, turning down a few offers that had once seemed like dreams come true. He focused on smaller projects, personal pieces, ones that no one had asked for. He returned to the abstract work that had started it all, experimenting with color, shape, and emotion. But even as he worked, the doubt lingered. Was this enough? Would the art world care if he wasn't producing on command? Would they forget him if he didn't meet their demands? Then one night, as Marcus was packing up, Darius stopped by again, a huge grin on his face. Guess what? Darius said, practically bursting with excitement. Marcus looked up from his sketchpad, tired but curious. What? The gallery called. They're doing a solo show for you. You got a month. Marcus froze. Wait, a solo show? Darius nodded. Yep. They're backing it. They're giving you a whole exhibition. All yours. Marcus felt his heart leap in his chest, but a wave of anxiety followed close behind. What if I don't have enough? What if I can't fill the space? What if they hate it? Darius smiled, his voice low and steady. Then you'll know that you stayed true to yourself. That's the only thing that matters. You can't control how people react, Marcus. You can only control what you create. As the date of the solo show approached, Marcus poured everything he had into his art. There were late nights, early mornings, and more moments of doubt than he could count. But with every brushstroke, every line, he could feel himself finding his way again. And when the opening night finally arrived, with a crowd of eager faces and a room full of his work, Marcus realized something important. This was his moment. Not to meet expectations, but to set them. To show who he was, and why he painted. He wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a creator. And this was just the beginning. The solo show was everything Marcus had dreamed of, and more. The gallery was packed. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the soft clink of wine glasses. The air was thick with excitement, and yet, Marcus felt an odd sense of isolation in the midst of the crowd. He had expected to feel elated, proud even, but instead, he felt like he was on display, his life and his work now something for others to consume. It was both exhilarating and suffocating at the same time. As the evening went on, more and more people approached him, asking questions about his process, his inspiration, and his future work. Some of them gushed over his talent, while others were more interested in what his next piece would be. The constant stream of praise felt like a flood, and though he appreciated it, it felt hollow in a way. Your work is incredible, a tall woman in a velvet dress said, eyes gleaming as she took in one of his abstract pieces. What's next? Do you have anything in the works for a bigger venue? A museum, perhaps? Marcus smiled politely, but inside, he felt uneasy. I'm working on some new ideas, he replied, unsure of how to answer her. The question echoed in his mind, though. What was next? The pressure to keep creating at the same level of success was already starting to weigh on him. Later in the evening, a well-dressed man with a slick haircut approached. He was the kind of person who exuded money and power, and Marcus immediately knew he was a potential buyer or investor. Hey, Marcus, the man said, extending his hand. I'm Zach. I represent a major art collector. They're looking for new artists to invest in. You've got a lot of potential. Marcus shook his hand, trying to mask the unease in his stomach. Thanks, he said. I'm just trying to make work that speaks to people. Oh, it does, Zach said, scanning the room. I can see the future in this. You've got something rare here. You want to talk numbers? A bigger show? A larger market? Marcus nodded slowly, but inside, he felt a growing knot in his chest. He had heard these lines before, the promises of fame, fortune, and opportunity. But he wasn't sure anymore if that was what he wanted. Was he supposed to chase these things? Was it a part of the deal? Or was there a way to stay true to himself while navigating all this? He excused himself politely, retreating to the back of the room for a moment of quiet. He needed to breathe. He needed to think. In the following weeks, the calls kept coming. Invitations to high-end gallery events, offers from art collectors, commissions for corporate spaces, the offers were overwhelming. But with each one came an unspoken expectation: create more. Create faster. Keep up the momentum. And the more he was asked to do, the more Marcus began to lose himself in the process. He found himself painting things he didn't want to paint. Pieces that were easy to sell, easy to market. They were beautiful in their own way, but they didn't hold the same fire that his earlier work had. They didn't make him feel the way he used to. He was creating to please others, not himself. One night, while working on yet another piece for a private collector, Marcus stared at his canvas and sighed. It wasn't the painting itself that bothered him. It was the feeling that had settled deep within him, the feeling of being trapped. There was a knock on the studio door. Marcus looked up, surprised. It was Darius. "Hey," Darius said, stepping inside. "You doing okay?" Marcus nodded absently, though his eyes were distant. "I don't know," he admitted. "This isn't what I thought it would be. All the offers, the attention. It's like I'm losing touch with what I'm doing. It's not me anymore." Darius looked at the painting Marcus was working on, then back at him. "It's not about the work anymore, is it?" Marcus's heart sank. Darius had always been able to read him like an open book. He didn't have to say anything. Darius knew. "No," Marcus replied quietly. "I don't know who I'm painting for anymore." Darius sat down across from him. "You're painting for you, man. You started this for yourself, remember? If you lose that, you lose everything. You can't make art because people expect you to. You do it because it's who you are. That's the only thing that will keep you grounded." Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the weight of Darius's words. The tension in his chest grew tighter. "I don't know if I can keep up with this," Marcus said, almost in a whisper. "The pressure. It's too much." "You're not alone in this," Darius said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't let the noise drown out what's inside you. That's the only thing that matters." A few days later, Marcus made a decision. He turned down the majority of the commissions that had been offered to him, even the ones with big names behind them. He pulled back from the frenzy of the art world and focused on what had first inspired him to paint, the raw emotion, the authenticity, and the love for creating something that meant something to him. He spent weeks in the studio, away from the spotlight, away from the demands. He didn't pick up the phone for meetings. He didn't check his email for new offers. He painted for himself. And in doing so, something changed. The colors on his canvas began to burn brighter. The strokes felt freer, more intentional. The art became his once more. But, as he would soon realize, even when you turn away from the noise, the world has a way of drawing you back in. It was a crisp morning when Marcus received the email that would change everything. He'd been in the studio for hours, covered in paint, lost in the rhythm of creation. His phone buzzed on the counter, and for a moment, he considered ignoring it: another business call, another commission. But something told him to check it. It was from Art Matters, a popular online art magazine. "Dear Marcus, we'd love to feature you in our next issue. Your work has generated a lot of buzz in the art world, but we think you're moving in a new direction, one that we're not sure is for the best. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the artistic choices you're making right now, particularly your recent pieces. We think it's time for you to weigh in on the criticism." The message felt like a punch to the gut. He knew there would be critics. There always were. But to have a prominent publication like Art Matters single him out, to label him as someone who was moving in a new direction, hit differently. His mind raced, bouncing from one thought to the next. Was he making the wrong decision by pulling away from what the art world expected? Was he truly losing touch with his own vision? Or was it simply the pressure of fame clouding his judgment? His heart began to beat faster as he read the email again. It was a subtle critique, but it was there. They were questioning his authenticity, his direction, and his art. Marcus set the phone down, pacing around the studio. His recent work was personal. Raw. But Art Matters, and the art world in general, was pushing for something different. Something more marketable, more commercial. They wanted that next big thing, not the slow, steady growth of an artist who was trying to rediscover his roots. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled in two directions. There was the artist he used to be, the one who painted because it was the only way to express himself. And then there was the artist the world wanted him to be, the one who could turn out popular, sellable pieces with a formula. The two didn't seem to align anymore. Later that day, the pressure began to intensify. He sat down for an interview with a well-known art critic, Claire Williams. She had a reputation for being blunt and unforgiving, but Marcus thought that was the price of success. After all, criticism was part of the deal, right? They sat across from each other at a small cafe near the gallery. Claire took a sip of her coffee before diving straight into it. "Marcus," she said, eyes narrowing slightly, "your recent work feels forced. It's different from your earlier pieces, and not in a good way. You've made a name for yourself by breaking boundaries, but these new pieces, they lack the rawness that originally made your work stand out." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He had expected some tough questions, but not like this. Not so harsh. "I'm just trying to explore new ideas," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying hint of frustration. "Art is about evolution. I've always believed that." Claire didn't flinch. "Sure, evolution is important. But you're not evolving, Marcus. You're selling out." The word stung more than he expected. It was a gut punch, but it wasn't the first time someone had accused him of that. The critics had always been waiting for him to fall, to prove that success could change him, to prove that he wasn't capable of sustaining the same level of innovation that had made him popular in the first place. "I'm not selling out," Marcus said, his tone firm now. "I'm just staying true to what feels real to me." Claire raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "The problem is, Marcus, what's real to you isn't what people are buying. What they want is art that they can understand. They want something that fits neatly into their homes, something they can hang on the wall and feel comfortable with. But that's not what you started out doing. And that's why your recent pieces don't resonate the same way." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Marcus couldn't deny the truth in her statement. His work had changed. It was evolving, but not necessarily in the way the world expected. After the interview, Marcus sat in his car for a long time, staring out the windshield. The city was alive around him, people bustling by, cars honking in the street, but all he could hear was Claire's voice echoing in his head. Was she right? Was he really losing touch with what made his art special? He pulled out his phone and opened the Art Matters article. There it was, in black and white. Marcus Miller has strayed from the raw emotion that once defined his work. His new pieces are polished, commercial, and calculated. Will he be remembered as an innovator, or simply as another artist who lost his edge to the demands of success? Marcus closed his eyes, letting the weight of it all wash over him. The same voice that had been his greatest strength, the voice that had once told him to follow his own path, to paint what felt right, was now the one questioning him. Was it all just a fluke? Was he always meant to be a fleeting trend in the art world? The pressure felt suffocating. Every time he picked up a brush, it felt like he was creating not for himself, but for the world outside. The world that wanted him to be something he wasn't sure he wanted to be anymore. The next morning, Darius stopped by the studio again. "Hey, you look like you've seen better days," Darius said, noticing the dark circles under Marcus's eyes. "I'm fine," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Something's off, man. What's going on?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled up the Art Matters article on his phone and handed it to Darius. "They're saying I've lost it. That I'm just trying to make safe art now." Darius read through the article quietly, then handed it back. "So what? You're going to let one article, or one critic, tell you who you are as an artist?" Marcus sighed. "It's not just that. It's everything. The pressure to stay relevant, to keep selling, to keep meeting everyone's expectations. I don't know how much longer I can do this." Darius shook his head. "Marcus, listen to me. You can't let them define you. Art is subjective, and there will always be someone who doesn't like what you're doing. But that doesn't mean you stop doing it. You have to make the art that feels right for you. That's how you stay true to yourself." Marcus looked at his friend, feeling the weight of his words. Maybe it wasn't about the critics, or the expectations, or the money. Maybe it was about remembering why he started this journey in the first place. He wasn't painting for them. He was painting for him. The studio was quiet when Marcus stepped inside that morning. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting soft light across the floor, but the usual buzz of energy he felt when working felt absent. The weight of his recent decisions hung over him like a dark cloud. The art world, with its criticisms and expectations, had become a battlefield, and Marcus wasn't sure which side he was on anymore. For days, he'd avoided his phone and emails, not wanting to face the outside world. But now, with the silence around him, it was time to confront it all. He took a deep breath, walked to his canvas, and picked up a brush. The decision was made. He was going to step away from the art scene. Just for a while. He needed space, to find himself again, to reconnect with the real reason he painted. No more commission requests. No more expectations. He would shut it all out. This was his moment to rediscover the rawness and authenticity that he had once felt when his art was his alone. There was something liberating about it. The idea that he could step away from the spotlight, if only for a time. Marcus knew it wasn't going to be easy. The art world wouldn't simply forget about him. In fact, he knew that this would only make the critics more aggressive. But he had to do it. He had to reclaim his voice. He pulled out a piece of paper, scribbling down a letter to his agent, his gallery, and anyone who had been following his work. "Dear friends and supporters. After much reflection, I have made the difficult decision to take a break from the art world for a while. While I am incredibly grateful for the opportunities and recognition that I've received, I feel that I've lost touch with the heart of my art. It's important to me to return to the core of why I started painting in the first place, to express what I feel, not what others expect of me. I ask for your understanding during this time. I'll be stepping away from public commissions and shows, and I'll be focusing on creating work that feels true to me. It's a journey I need to take alone, to rediscover the artist I once was. Thank you for your support, and I hope you'll understand that this is a necessary step for my own growth. Best. Marcus Miller." He hit send, feeling both relieved and terrified at the same time. There was no turning back now. The art world had been kind to him, but the pressure had changed him. Now, he had to follow his gut, no matter the consequences. For the next few months, Marcus disappeared from the public eye. The gallery held a press conference in his absence, explaining that he was taking time to reflect and develop new work. The rumors swirled, of course. Some said he was struggling with his creative process, others whispered that he was burnt out, that fame had ruined him. But Marcus didn't care about that. He didn't care about what people were saying. He was focused on what he was doing in his studio, something deeply personal and private. He started by revisiting old sketches. The ones that had once inspired his first successful pieces. The raw drawings, the smudged lines, the images of struggle and pain, they all felt familiar and true to him. He began painting with abandon again, no expectations, no deadlines. There was freedom in the brushstrokes now, a release he hadn't realized he had been missing. Each painting became more emotional, more real. They didn't need to be perfect. They didn't need to fit any mold. They were expressions of his feelings in the moment, and for the first time in a long while, he was proud of his work. One day, while he was painting, there was a knock at the door. It was Darius. "I figured you'd be here," Darius said, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "I heard the news." "You really did it, huh?" Marcus shrugged, not quite sure how to feel about it yet. "I had to. I was losing myself in all the noise. I needed to get back to what felt real." Darius looked around the studio, taking in the scattered brushes and half-finished paintings. "It's good to see you painting like this again. I knew you'd come around. I could tell you were suffocating." "I just couldn't keep up with it," Marcus admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I thought I had to keep pushing, keep making what people wanted. But I wasn't making anything I cared about. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next, or if anyone's going to care when I come back, but I can't keep doing it for them." Darius grinned, leaning against the doorframe. "Man, that's the spirit. When you come back, people will care. Not because of what you make, but because you made it." Marcus smiled, his heart a little lighter. "I hope you're right." As the weeks passed, Marcus continued to paint. The break was exactly what he needed. Slowly, his confidence returned, and with it, a new sense of purpose. He wasn't the same artist he had been before, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. He had evolved, yes, but in a way that felt more organic, more true. He knew that the art world would expect him to return with something grand, something marketable. But Marcus wasn't ready to meet those expectations. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't care. When the day came to announce his return, Marcus was ready. He sent out an email to his agent, informing them he was ready to begin discussing new shows, but this time, he made one thing clear: he wasn't going to do it on anyone's terms but his own. It was a new beginning, one built on his own foundation, free from the pressure of being anything other than himself. And when the world was ready for it, they would see what Marcus Miller had to offer, raw, unapologetic, and true. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Months had passed since Marcus stepped away from the chaos of the art world. His decision had been a shock to many, a defiance that left some wondering if he was running from his success. But Marcus wasn't running. He was rediscovering. Finding his roots, his soul, and his purpose as an artist. The work he'd created in his isolation was nothing short of transformative, a collection of pieces that were both raw and refined, a blend of vulnerability and strength that he had never been able to capture before. It wasn't just a return to art, it was a return to himself. Now, the time had come to step back into the world that had once adored him, that had pushed him into a corner and nearly squeezed the life out of his creativity. But Marcus wasn't the same man who had left. He had found his voice, and he intended to use it. He sat in front of the canvas, staring at the half-finished piece before him. It was a large painting, bold, emotional, chaotic even, but there was a softness to it too. Layers of color, each one representing a different moment in his life, in his journey. It was messy, in the best way. The world wasn't going to like it. But that was okay. He wasn't making it for them. The opening night of his new exhibit was just days away, and Marcus could feel the anticipation building in the air. There was an energy that buzzed through the city, a collective curiosity surrounding what he had been up to in his time away. His gallery had made a small announcement, teasing his return, but they knew better than to make promises. The critics were already sharpening their pens, waiting to see if he would rise or fall from the pedestal they had placed him on. He'd kept his distance from the media during his hiatus. No interviews. No press releases. But now, the day had come. Marcus was ready to face whatever came his way. On the night of the opening, the gallery was packed. It wasn't a huge crowd, that wasn't Marcus's style, but it was a curated group of collectors, art lovers, critics, and friends. Among them was Claire Williams, the art critic who had once labeled him a sellout. Her presence made Marcus feel a little uneasy, but he wasn't about to shy away from her gaze now. She was just another critic in the room, another voice that could say what they wanted. He had nothing to prove to her anymore. The lights dimmed, and the first visitors began to file in. The room was filled with murmurs of surprise, a soft hum of curiosity. As people moved through the exhibit, their reactions were mixed. Some were stunned by the raw emotion of the paintings, while others seemed uncomfortable with the chaos that painted the walls. The colors were bold and overwhelming, with no clear path of understanding. It wasn't the kind of art that invited easy interpretations. But that was the point. Claire was one of the first to approach Marcus. She was wearing a black turtleneck and dark glasses, her usual detached demeanor now slightly more guarded. She had always been a hard one to read, but tonight, Marcus could sense something different in her presence. "Interesting," Claire said, taking in the intensity of a piece that seemed to pulse with energy. "I didn't expect this. It's messy." Marcus smiled, his eyes locking onto hers. "Yeah, it is. But that's what art is, right? Messy. Life is messy." Claire didn't say anything at first, but her lips twitched, like she was trying to hold back a compliment. Finally, she let out a slow breath. "I won't lie. I didn't think you had this in you. But I see it now. The emotion. The vulnerability. It's there." For a moment, they stood in silence, both taking in the rawness of the paintings. Claire seemed to soften a little, her usual sharpness replaced with something more introspective. "You've changed," she said quietly. "This is a different Marcus Miller." "I'm not the same person I was," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "And I don't want to be." Claire nodded, her eyes lingering on the painting before her. "Well, I can't say I agree with everything in this exhibit. But I respect it. You've stayed true to yourself, even if it's not what I expected." Marcus could feel the weight of her words. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was something he hadn't expected from her: respect. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Marcus walked through the gallery, speaking to old friends, collectors, and even a few new faces who were intrigued by the sudden shift in his style. He could feel their eyes on him, trying to decipher the story behind the paint, but he wasn't giving them any answers. This time, they had to meet him where he was. The night was a mixture of uncertainty and validation. There were whispers, some admiring the emotional depth, others unsure of what to make of the unrefined chaos. But that was part of it. The art world would always be divided. It was up to Marcus to decide how to navigate it. As the evening came to a close, Marcus stepped outside into the cool night air, his heart still pounding from the rush of it all. The critics and the collectors, they were still there, still watching him. But for the first time in a long while, he felt okay with it. He wasn't afraid of their judgment anymore. He had done it. He had stepped into the arena and laid his soul bare for them to see. And whatever happened now, he was ready. Days later, the reviews began to trickle in. Most of the reactions were mixed, but there was one common thread: Marcus had surprised them. They hadn't expected him to take such a bold, unconventional direction. His work was raw, emotional, and unapologetic. It wasn't for everyone, but it wasn't meant to be. One critic, who had once been harsh on him, called the exhibit a stunning return to form, a reminder of the power of art to reflect the truth of the artist's soul. Others questioned his motives, wondering if he was trying to shock the world into paying attention. But no matter the reaction, Marcus was okay with it. He had rediscovered his voice, and that was enough. It wasn't long before his gallery was receiving more requests for his work. The critics may have been divided, but the collectors were lining up. They weren't looking for the easy sell Marcus had once been known for. They wanted the artist who had the courage to paint from his soul, to reveal the beauty in the mess. And as Marcus prepared for his next show, a smaller, more intimate exhibition, he knew one thing for certain: he was no longer chasing the art world's approval. He had found something far more valuable, his own. Marcus had spent the better part of the last year carefully navigating his return to the art world. The past few months had been a whirlwind of exhibitions, private viewings, and an increasing demand for his work. People were taking notice, some were amazed by his raw, emotional pieces, while others still struggled to understand them. Yet, despite the mixed reactions, there was no denying that his career was flourishing once again. But with success came pressure, and it wasn't long before Marcus started to feel the weight of the expectations that came with it. One evening, as he was finishing up a new painting, a large canvas filled with swirling reds, blacks, and muted golds, his phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at it, seeing that it was an email from his agent, Eva. "Marcus, we've had an offer for your next collection. A major collector is interested in acquiring the entire series. They're asking for specific themes, though. Something more marketable. Think of the potential." Marketable. The word hung in the air like a cloud, an unsettling reminder of the forces that had once pushed him to compromise his art. He had worked so hard to escape that world, to create pieces that were authentically his own. Yet, now, it seemed the very thing he had fought for was coming back to haunt him. He closed his eyes for a moment, rubbing his temples. The pressure to create for the market was never far behind. Every time he painted something personal, something that truly resonated with him, the art world wanted more pieces, more of the same, more of what they could sell. Eva's email was polite but firm. She was a skilled agent, and she knew how to make the numbers look good, how to spin the offer in a way that would make it hard for him to say no. But Marcus wasn't sure if he could compromise again. Not after everything he had worked for. The next day, Marcus met with Eva for coffee at his favorite cafe. She was already sitting at a table, her laptop open, her brow furrowed in concentration. She smiled when she saw him, but there was a subtle urgency in her eyes, the kind that only came when she was pushing for something. "You've seen the offer?" she asked, not wasting time with pleasantries. "I've seen it," Marcus replied, taking a seat across from her. He could tell she was eager to get this deal finalized, but something inside him was pulling him in a different direction. "I'm just not sure it's right for me." Eva leaned in, her voice softening. "Marcus, listen. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A huge collector wants your work. This could solidify your place in the art world. This kind of recognition doesn't come around often." Marcus nodded, but the words felt hollow. "I don't want to be remembered for creating work that's just for sale, Eva. That's not why I paint. I can't go back to making things just to please someone else." Eva sighed, pushing her coffee cup aside. "I understand that, I do. But we're talking about a massive deal here. This is how artists become legends. This is your chance to set your legacy in stone. It's not about losing yourself, it's about expanding your reach. You can still create for yourself, but a little compromise goes a long way." Marcus stared at her, feeling a knot form in his stomach. Eva was right, to some extent. Success in the art world often came with compromises. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of marketability wouldn't be so bad. But deep down, he knew that wasn't what he wanted. Not anymore. "I get it, Eva. But I'm not going to sacrifice my soul for a paycheck," Marcus said, his voice firm. "I've worked too hard to get to a place where I can create freely, where I can paint what I feel, not what someone else expects." Eva's expression shifted, a mixture of frustration and concern. "Marcus, you're going to alienate yourself. The collectors won't wait forever. This offer could set you up for years. I don't need to be set up for years, Marcus replied, leaning back in his chair. I just need to make art that matters. Art that's true to me. Eva didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked down at her laptop, her fingers tapping nervously on the keyboard. After a long silence, she sighed. I can't make this decision for you, Marcus. But I hope you know what you're doing. The conversation lingered in the air like an unfinished symphony, and as Marcus left the cafe, he knew that the decision he was making wasn't just about an art deal. It was about who he wanted to be as an artist, and whether he was willing to risk it all for the sake of maintaining his authenticity. Weeks went by, and the tension grew. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the world was watching him, waiting for him to either fall back into the trap of commercial success or remain true to the path he had chosen. His gallery had begun to push for the marketable work as well. They wanted pieces that would sell, pieces that would fit into the homes of the wealthy collectors who had supported his early career. They were patient with him, but the subtle pressure was there. Every conversation, every meeting, every glance at the clock reminded him that time was running out to make a decision. It wasn't long before the next big event loomed on the horizon, a solo show that had been in the works for months. The gallery expected him to deliver something that would wow the critics and sell to collectors. They had already begun circulating teasers, promoting the event as a major milestone in his comeback. As Marcus stared at the empty canvas in front of him, he felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This wasn't just about a single show, it was about his entire future as an artist. He could give in. He could paint what they wanted. He could create work that would sell for millions, secure his place in history, and live a life of luxury. But at what cost? He picked up his paintbrush and began working, his mind whirling with the tension between what he was expected to create and what he felt he needed to say. Each stroke was an act of defiance, a silent protest against the pressure to conform. Marcus wasn't sure how it would turn out, but for the first time in a while, he didn't care. Whatever happened next, he was going to paint from the heart. The opening night of Marcus's new exhibition had arrived. It was the culmination of months of work, late nights, and quiet moments of self-doubt. The pieces on display were more personal, more raw, than anything he had ever done before. They were a reflection of his journey, his struggles, and his triumphs, but they were also a reflection of the struggle between what the world expected of him and what he was willing to give. The pieces were not made for approval. They were made to say something that had never been said before. Yet, as the first guests began to filter into the gallery, Marcus couldn't help but feel a gnawing unease deep in his stomach. The lights were dim, casting long shadows over the walls where his works hung. The air was thick with the smell of freshly opened wine bottles, the low murmur of voices, and the clink of glasses. It felt like any other opening night, but this time, something was different. The stakes were higher. His heart raced, his palms slightly sweaty, as he greeted a few familiar faces. But even in their warm smiles, he could sense the judgment. They weren't just here to appreciate the art. They were here to analyze it, to dissect it, to determine if Marcus had truly returned or if he was lost in his own ambition. Among the crowd was Claire Williams, the renowned art critic who had once been the loudest voice in condemning Marcus's early career. Her icy demeanor made it clear that her approval wasn't easily won. In fact, Marcus wasn't sure she would ever approve of him, regardless of the art he created. He could already feel her eyes on him, sharp and calculating. But tonight wasn't just about Claire. It was about the critics, the collectors, and the people who would determine his future in the art world. As the evening wore on, the murmurs grew louder. Some people were visibly moved by the emotion and vulnerability in Marcus's work. They admired the intensity of the colors, the rawness of the brushstrokes, and the depth of the subject matter. Others, however, seemed unsettled. Some shook their heads, as if confused by the chaotic energy in the paintings. Some asked him if they could understand the pieces, if they could get into the artist's head to make sense of it all. It was clear that not everyone appreciated the direction Marcus had taken. The critics were beginning to make their rounds, their words careful, measured, but with that unmistakable air of superiority. Marcus couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversations as they analyzed his work. "It's all over the place," one critic said. "The technique is sloppy. There's no refinement. It's almost as if he's trying too hard," another added. "Like he's trying to prove something. The chaos seems forced." Marcus's stomach churned. He knew the criticisms were coming, but hearing them from people who had the power to shape public opinion stung more than he had anticipated. It wasn't the first time his work had been criticized, but it was different now. This time, he had poured his heart and soul into the pieces. This time, he was exposing himself to the world in a way that he never had before. But still, there was a nagging feeling deep within him that he couldn't shake. Had he made a mistake? Was he too far removed from the art world that he no longer understood what they wanted? Or worse, was he so lost in his pursuit of authenticity that he had lost touch with what made art universally appealing? A few hours into the exhibition, Marcus found himself standing in front of one of his most daring pieces. It was a portrait, a self-portrait, to be exact, one that had taken weeks to finish. It was messy, chaotic, and filled with symbols that only he could fully understand. His face in the painting was distorted, fragmented, as though he had peeled away the layers of his identity and revealed something beneath the surface. It was uncomfortable to look at, raw and unfinished, like a wound still healing. As Marcus stared at the portrait, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Claire Williams standing there, her expression unreadable. She took a moment to study the painting before speaking. "Interesting," Claire said, her voice calm but with an edge of sarcasm. "A self-portrait, I see. You're really putting it all out there, aren't you?" Marcus met her gaze, his own expression steady. "I think art should reflect who you are. It's about honesty." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Honesty?" she repeated, her tone skeptical. "I don't know if I'd call this honesty. It's more like a performance. You're trying so hard to be something that I'm not sure you actually are. The chaos, the mess, it feels like a gimmick. Like you're trying to make people feel something that's not really there." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Her words hit harder than he had expected. He had been prepared for criticism, but Claire's words felt like a personal attack. Still, he didn't want to show any weakness. "Not now. I'm not trying to make people feel anything," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'm trying to make myself feel something. This is who I am now. This is my truth." Claire smiled faintly. "Your truth? Well, I can respect that, even if I don't fully agree with it. But the question remains, Marcus, does the world want your truth? Or do they just want the version of you that sells?" Her words hung in the air long after she walked away. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. She was right about one thing: the art world was built on a delicate balance of truth and commercial success. But could he truly separate the two? Could he keep creating for himself, even if it meant alienating the very people who had helped build his career? By the end of the night, Marcus was exhausted. He had smiled, he had nodded, he had answered questions, but all he could think about was the reviews that would come in the following days. The critics had already made their judgments, and no amount of conversation could change their minds. His work was too raw, too real, too different. The morning after the opening, the reviews began to trickle in. The first one he read was from a major art magazine, and it was not kind. It referred to his exhibition as self-indulgent, over the top, and a far cry from the artist's early promise. The critic dismissed the work as art for art's sake, accusing Marcus of losing sight of what made him relevant in the first place. But then, a second review came in, and it was an entirely different story. This critic praised Marcus for his boldness, calling the exhibit a triumphant return to form and describing his work as a masterclass in vulnerability. The critic acknowledged that the work was challenging, but that was precisely what made it compelling. The review ended with a statement that Marcus would never forget: true art is meant to provoke, and Marcus Miller is doing exactly that. The reviews were polarizing, as he had expected. But somewhere deep inside, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The critics' verdict wasn't going to define him. What mattered most was that he had stayed true to his vision, and that, in itself, was worth more than any praise or condemnation. It wasn't long after the reviews started rolling in that Marcus began to feel the weight of his choices. The polarized reactions to his exhibition were the first signs that his art, and his approach to it, were pushing him to a dangerous edge. Some praised him for his unflinching authenticity, but many others criticized him for going too far, for losing touch with what made his early work so accessible. The phone calls from potential buyers that once flooded his inbox had slowed to a trickle. The collectors were no longer as eager to purchase his pieces. It seemed that Marcus's truth was too much for the world to handle. The real cost, however, wasn't just in the potential financial loss. It was in the isolation that followed. The invitations to high-profile art events became less frequent, and the buzz around his name began to fade. Marcus had always known that staying true to his artistic vision would come with risks, but now he was seeing those risks materialize in ways he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as he sat alone in his studio, sipping a glass of wine, Marcus reflected on how things had changed. The walls, once lined with paintings that reflected his journey and his passions, now felt emptier. The canvases were still there, but the energy in the room was different. He wasn't sure if it was the quietness of his career or the overwhelming silence from the art world, but it felt as if his paintings had stopped speaking. The pressure to sell had never been so tangible. He'd received an offer on one of his larger pieces, a work he was particularly proud of, but the price was too low for what it truly meant to him. The buyer was a wealthy collector who saw the piece as an investment, something to hang on their wall to show off at social gatherings. But Marcus knew that piece was more than just an object. It represented a moment of clarity, a breakthrough in his work. He couldn't let it go for the sake of status, even if it meant losing out on much-needed funds. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was Eva. "Marcus, we need to talk. Call me when you get a chance." His chest tightened. Eva had been his agent for years, and their relationship had always been built on mutual respect. But lately, the tone of her messages had changed. She was starting to sound more like a businesswoman than the passionate advocate she once was. Marcus dialed her number. "Marcus," Eva's voice came through the phone, sharp and professional, "I've been talking to some people, and it seems like your work isn't resonating the way it used to. There's a growing concern about your direction, and frankly, I'm worried about the future." Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I knew this was coming. I've always been prepared for the fallout. But I can't compromise my work just to fit in. You know that." Eva was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice softened. "I understand. I really do. But you have to understand, Marcus, this is the reality of the art world. You can't afford to lose the interest of the collectors. You can't afford to isolate yourself." The words stung, even though he knew they were true. He had always known that success in the art world came with its conditions. But hearing them from Eva, someone who had been by his side through thick and thin, made it feel even more painful. "Are you saying I should change my style? Make the work more marketable?" Marcus asked, the frustration creeping into his voice. "No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that if you want to survive in this industry, you need to adapt. You've always been about pushing boundaries, but now you need to find a balance between your vision and the market demands. It's a fine line, but it's one you'll have to walk if you want to keep this career alive." Marcus felt a pang of disappointment. The harsh truth was that he had always known this would happen. The art world didn't reward risk-taking in the same way it rewarded conformity. To stay relevant, he would have to play the game. But that wasn't the kind of artist he wanted to be. "I appreciate your honesty, Eva." "I'll think about it," Marcus said, though he knew deep down that the choice was already made. He wasn't going to compromise. Not now, not ever. The weeks that followed were some of the most challenging of Marcus's life. He found himself at a crossroads, unsure of how to move forward. His work was still being shown at galleries, but fewer people were showing interest. The phone calls from potential buyers were few and far between, and each new rejection stung more than the last. But despite the growing doubt, Marcus refused to make art simply for the sake of selling it. He spent his days in the studio, working on a new series that he had started to conceptualize in his mind. This new work would be different, more experimental, more visceral. He wanted to strip away the layers of pretense that had built up around his career and return to the rawness that had once defined his art. If the world didn't want to see it, so be it. He would create it anyway. But the isolation was beginning to wear on him. He began to miss the excitement of the early days, when his art had captured the imagination of people from all walks of life. He missed the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself, of being a part of a community of artists and collectors who understood the significance of what he was trying to say. One afternoon, as he was walking through the city to clear his mind, Marcus passed by a small gallery he had never noticed before. The windows were filled with paintings, sculptures, and various pieces of art. There was a sign in the window that read, "Emerging Artists Wanted, Submissions Open." For a brief moment, Marcus stood there, staring at the sign. It was a simple invitation, but it felt like a sign. Maybe this was the chance he needed to get back to his roots, to connect with artists who were also fighting to be heard, who were also struggling to find their place in the world. With a deep breath, he stepped inside. The gallery owner, a kind woman named Sophia, greeted him warmly. After a few minutes of conversation, Marcus shared his story, how he had struggled to stay true to his art in an industry that often seemed more focused on profit than authenticity. Sophia listened intently, nodding in understanding. "You know," she said, "sometimes it's not about fitting into the big art world. It's about finding your own space, your own voice. Art should always be about the artist's truth, not the world's expectations. If you stay true to that, people will come to you." For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt a spark of hope. Maybe he hadn't lost everything. Maybe, in this smaller space, there was room for his art to breathe, without the pressure to conform, without the fear of rejection. The days following his visit to Sophia's gallery were a turning point for Marcus. He had entered that small, unassuming space seeking something, he wasn't sure what exactly, but what he found was a renewed sense of purpose. The conversations he had with Sophia, the other artists in the gallery, and the sense of community that filled the room reignited a fire in him. It was as if he had spent too long trying to force himself into a mold that didn't fit, and now, he could breathe again. He spent the next week reflecting on everything he had been through. His journey had been tumultuous, filled with highs and lows, victories and defeats. But now, it wasn't just about making art for the sake of recognition or financial success. It was about staying true to his essence. He remembered the early days, how free and unburdened he had felt when he first picked up a brush, long before the pressure of success had weighed him down. In that moment, he knew what he had to do, to create without apology, to let his work be driven by his inner truth, and to stop caring about the market forces that tried to define him. Marcus began to experiment more. He dove back into his studio, letting the chaos and freedom that had once characterized his art return. The fear of rejection faded, replaced by a deeper, more visceral drive to create. His new work wasn't necessarily going to please everyone, and that was fine. It was going to be his. It was going to reflect his soul. A few weeks later, Marcus's new pieces were ready. They were more abstract, more primal than anything he had ever done. He painted with an urgency, as if the brushstrokes were coming from a place deep within him, beyond logic or reason. The colors were bold, the forms aggressive, and the textures raw. He poured his emotions into every piece, using vibrant reds, deep blues, and striking yellows to express the turbulence he felt inside. These paintings didn't seek approval, they sought connection. They told stories that were personal but universal, the rage of oppression, the quiet strength in resilience, the beauty found in struggle. But even as Marcus found his footing in this new phase of his artistic life, the world outside his studio hadn't changed much. The art world, with all its judgments, remained as fickle as ever. The galleries that had once been eager to represent him weren't calling anymore, and the collectors who had once clamored for his work had moved on to the next big thing. But Marcus didn't care. He wasn't creating for them. He was creating for himself, for the people who truly understood the message behind the art. That was enough. One afternoon, as he was preparing to take his new pieces to a small independent gallery for a showing, Marcus received a message from an unexpected source. It was an email from Claire Williams, the art critic who had once dismissed his early work so harshly. The subject line read, "A New Direction." He clicked open the email, unsure of what to expect. To his surprise, Claire's words were not filled with her usual sharp critique but instead offered a different tone, one of curiosity and even respect. Dear Marcus, I've been following your work closely since your last exhibition. I have to admit, I didn't expect this new direction. It's bold, unrefined, and entirely different from anything I've seen from you before. There's an intensity to it that I can't ignore. Your paintings speak with a rawness that's often missing from much of today's art. I would like to meet and discuss your new work. I think there's something here worth exploring. Best regards. Claire Williams, *. Marcus sat back in his chair, reading the email over and over again. He couldn't believe it. Claire had always been the kind of critic who tore apart every piece she reviewed, offering no quarter for any perceived weakness. To see her acknowledge his new direction was almost surreal. He had no idea what had changed her mind, but a part of him felt vindicated. Maybe, just maybe, his risk had paid off. He decided to take her up on her offer. A meeting with Claire Williams, the critic who had so often been his nemesis, could be the breakthrough he needed. For better or worse, it was time to face the judgment of the one person whose opinion had haunted him for years. The day of the meeting arrived, and Marcus was filled with a mix of nervous energy and cautious optimism. He arrived at Claire's office, a sleek, modern space filled with minimalist furniture and framed art. Claire greeted him warmly, which surprised him. He had expected her to be cold and detached, but instead, she seemed genuinely interested in what he had to say. They sat across from each other at a polished wooden table, the air thick with anticipation. Claire wasted no time in diving into the conversation. I'll be honest, she began, when I first saw your new work, I wasn't sure what to make of it. It was jarring, chaotic, but there was something about it that felt authentic. Unfiltered. You're not hiding behind any pretensions, Marcus. You're showing the world exactly who you are. Marcus smiled, surprised by her straightforwardness. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, he said. I've spent so many years trying to meet the expectations of others, but I've realized that the only thing that matters is staying true to what I feel inside. Claire nodded, her eyes searching his face. And that's what I see in your work now. It's messy, it's raw, but it's real. It's your truth, and that's something you can't fake. The conversation continued for hours, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt understood. Claire, despite her reputation for being a tough critic, wasn't interested in tearing him down. She saw his evolution, respected his journey, and recognized the power in his art. By the end of the meeting, Claire promised to write a review about his new collection. But this time, there was no hint of malice in her tone. She seemed genuinely excited to share his work with the world. That night, as Marcus left the meeting, he felt a strange sense of peace. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he was on the right path. The world might not always understand him, but as long as he stayed true to himself, that was all that mattered. The day Marcus received Claire's review, he was standing in his studio, trying to balance the weight of a new canvas he had just begun to work on. His hands were covered in paint, the colors blending together in vibrant streaks. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was on the verge of something monumental, but still, he couldn't shake the underlying feeling of uncertainty. He wiped his hands on a rag and reached for his phone, still unsure whether to check his messages or not. When he saw Claire's review pop up on his screen, the headline immediately caught his attention. Marcus Green, the artist who found his truth. He hesitated for a moment. It wasn't like he hadn't been reviewed before, but this was different. Claire had always been critical, sometimes even scathing. But now, the article was a complete departure from everything he had expected. She praised the rawness of his work, the way he had completely shed the artifice of his earlier creations, and how his new pieces spoke with an unapologetic clarity. The review was a celebration, not just of the art, but of his evolution as an artist. The first wave of relief washed over him. He wasn't just a man chasing after his vision anymore. Now, people were beginning to see it too. As the days passed, the buzz surrounding Marcus's latest collection grew louder. His inbox began to fill with inquiries from galleries, critics, and potential buyers. The art world, so quick to dismiss him just months before, was now clamoring for his attention. But despite the whirlwind of emails, phone calls, and social media messages, Marcus didn't let it get to his head. He was careful not to get swept up in the rush of success, reminding himself that his journey was still far from over. Sophia, the gallery owner, called him the day after the review was published. She was ecstatic. "This is it, Marcus. You've done it," she said, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "I've already got buyers lined up, and I'm getting requests for your work from major collectors. This is the kind of attention we've been waiting for." "I know," Marcus replied, trying to keep the emotion out of his voice. "But I don't want to get caught up in the hype. I just want to keep making the art. That's all." Sophia chuckled softly. "I know. But we can't deny the momentum. You've worked too hard for this to let it pass you by. Just remember, it's not just about the art now. It's about the business, too." Marcus nodded, but inside, he felt a twinge of unease. For so long, he had kept his focus solely on his work, but now, it seemed like he was being thrust into a world he wasn't fully prepared for, the business side of art. The offers from collectors and galleries, the pressure to sell, the expectations of success. It was all coming at him so quickly, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. 2 days later, Marcus was at a meeting with one of the top galleries in the city. The room was sleek and modern, with large windows letting in the afternoon light. On the walls, a few select pieces from his recent collection had been hung, and as Marcus stood there, taking it all in, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This was the kind of opportunity he had always dreamed of, to be seen, to have his work represented on the walls of prestigious spaces. But even as he thought about how far he had come, he knew that success was fragile. He had seen too many artists burn out after reaching the pinnacle of their careers. The key, he realized, was balance. He had to keep his focus on the art, but he couldn't ignore the business side of things. A sleek, well-dressed man in his mid-40s walked into the room, extending a hand to Marcus. His name was Thomas Avery, and he was the gallery's director. He greeted Marcus warmly, his eyes scanning the artwork with an air of professional detachment. "Marcus, your work has created quite a stir," Thomas said as they sat down at a table. "We've had offers from several high-profile collectors. Your pieces are in high demand right now." "I'm glad to hear that," Marcus replied, though a part of him felt an odd sense of discomfort. He hadn't created this work to sell it to the highest bidder. He had made it to express something deeper. Thomas continued, "I think we can make this work for both of us. We're prepared to offer you representation. The terms are very favorable, and you'll have access to an entirely new market. This is the kind of exposure every artist dreams of." The offer was tempting. In many ways, it was everything Marcus had worked for, the validation, the exposure, the chance to truly make a name for himself. But something inside him stirred uneasily. He had to be careful. He knew what happened when an artist allowed the business side of things to eclipse their passion. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said slowly, but I need some time to think it over. I want to make sure that whatever happens, I'm still in control of my art. Thomas nodded, not seeming particularly fazed by Marcus's hesitation. Of course. Take your time. We'll be here when you're ready. Walking out of the gallery, Marcus felt the weight of his decision hanging in the air. This was a pivotal moment. The art world had opened up for him, but with that openness came expectations. Expectations he hadn't bargained for. He had to decide if he was willing to let the business side of his success dictate his path, or if he would remain true to the artist he had always been. As he walked back to his studio, the streets of the city felt different. The energy around him seemed more intense, the noise of the world more pressing. There was no denying the breakthrough he had achieved. He was finally being recognized, his art was being seen, and he was being offered opportunities that artists could only dream of. But at the same time, he couldn't help but wonder, was this the moment where his soul would begin to get lost in the whirlwind of success? That night, Marcus returned to his studio, looking at his paintings, the raw emotion captured in every brushstroke. He knew that he had come too far to turn back now. His art had already spoken for itself. What mattered now was that he kept speaking through it. The battle, Marcus realized, was not with the art world. It was with himself. The choice was his, to either compromise and embrace the system or to continue creating on his terms, regardless of the cost. The days following Marcus's meeting with Thomas Avery were filled with tension. His inbox continued to flood with offers from galleries, collectors, and art critics eager to feature his work. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from old friends and acquaintances congratulating him, some sincere, others tinged with envy. Marcus found himself constantly checking his email, his messages, wondering if the next notification would be the one that changed everything. But as the offers piled up, so did the pressure. The art world that had once seemed so distant and elusive now felt like an overwhelming force. Every decision, every brushstroke, every exhibition, every contract, felt as if it would determine the future of his career. And with each new offer, the stakes grew higher. One night, as he sat in his studio, staring at the new collection he had been working on, the weight of it all became unbearable. He thought back to the day he had first picked up a paintbrush, when the world was simple and his vision was pure. It had been about passion, about expression, not about contracts and market trends. But now, it felt as though his art was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone, the critics, the collectors, the galleries. The pressure to succeed, to meet everyone's expectations, began to wear on him. The freedom he once had felt so easily, that had flowed naturally from him, now seemed like a distant memory. It wasn't long before the first cracks began to show. Marcus had agreed to work with a high-profile gallery, enticed by the promises of exposure and financial security. He had told himself that it was a necessary step for his growth, that it would help him reach a broader audience. But when he walked into the gallery's sleek, modern space for his first exhibition, the reality hit him hard. The walls, white and sterile, felt like a cold, impersonal backdrop for his work. The paintings, his paintings, were no longer pieces of his soul. They had become commodities to be sold, to be analyzed, to be critiqued by a crowd that cared more about the price tag than the meaning behind the strokes. The opening night of the show was a blur. The gallery was packed with affluent buyers and critics, all of them examining his work with the sharp, detached eyes of people who were accustomed to seeing art as an investment rather than a form of expression. Marcus stood by his paintings, smiling through the forced pleasantries, but inside, he felt a growing sense of discomfort. This was what he had worked for, wasn't it? A successful exhibition, recognition from the art world, offers from collectors, and yet, he felt empty. His heart wasn't in it anymore. A woman approached him, a collector from one of the city's top museums. She looked at him with a polite smile, her eyes scanning the piece behind him. "Your work is stunning," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "I can see that you've really tapped into something unique here. It's raw. It speaks to something deep." "Thank you," Marcus said, forcing a smile, though her praise felt hollow. He wasn't sure if she understood the work at all. To her, it was just another trendy piece by a rising artist. To him, it was a reflection of his pain, his growth, his journey. But to her, it was just something to be acquired, something to fit into a collection. "I'm interested in acquiring a few of your pieces," the woman continued. "We'd love to display them in our museum. We can discuss the terms later. But first, I'd love to know, what inspired you to create this series?" Marcus hesitated. He knew what the woman wanted. She wanted a neat, packaged story, a soundbite, something that could be easily explained to the public. But how could he explain the chaos, the struggle, the deep, gut-wrenching emotion behind the pieces? How could he put into words the turmoil he had experienced to get to this point? He swallowed and looked at the painting behind him, his mind racing for something palatable to say. "It's about the human experience," he said finally, trying to keep his answer vague, but genuine. "It's about the conflict within us, the tension between who we are and who we are expected to be." The woman nodded, though she didn't seem to care about the depth of his answer. She was already mentally calculating how much the piece would fetch at auction, how it would fit into her carefully curated collection. For a moment, Marcus felt like he was nothing more than a product, a piece of a much larger machine. After the event, Marcus found himself lying awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling of alienation that had settled over him. He had been so focused on achieving success that he had never stopped to think about what that success would feel like. The reality was nothing like the dream. The art world, with all its prestige and accolades, felt suffocating. His paintings, once so full of life and personal meaning, now felt like hollow shells, detached from their creator. A few days later, he received a call from Sophia. Her voice was calm but concerned as she spoke. "I've been hearing some troubling things," she said. "Some people are saying your work has lost its edge. They're saying that you're compromising your vision for the sake of commercial success." Marcus clenched his jaw. "I'm not compromising anything," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "I'm just doing what I have to do." Sophia sighed. "Marcus, I know this world. I know what it can do to an artist. It can make you forget who you are. But don't let it. Don't let them turn you into something you're not." The word stung. She was right, of course. He had been so focused on the business of art that he had lost sight of why he started painting in the first place. The joy of creation, the freedom of expression, had all been replaced by the grind of marketing, selling, and pleasing the masses. And now, it felt like the art was slipping away from him, just as his sense of self seemed to fade into the background. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, gallery openings, and media appearances. Marcus continued to push forward, but it felt like he was walking through life in a fog. He was making more money than he had ever dreamed, but it came at a cost. His work was more in demand than ever, but each new piece felt less like an expression of his soul and more like a transaction. And then, just when he thought things couldn't get any more overwhelming, he received an unexpected email. It was from Claire Williams, the art critic who had once been so harsh in her reviews. The subject line read, "A new review, the truth behind the artist." Marcus hesitated before opening it, unsure of what he would find. But when he read the first few lines, he felt a wave of anxiety flood over him. Claire had written a scathing review, accusing him of abandoning his roots, of selling out to the art world's demands. The review was sharp, critical, and brutally honest, everything he had feared would happen. As he read the words, a single thought ran through his mind: this was the reckoning. Marcus stared at the email for what seemed like an eternity. The words on the screen blurred into one long, jagged line as the weight of Claire's review pressed down on him. Every phrase felt like a blow. She had painted him as a sellout, an artist who had traded his authenticity for fame and fortune. She had accused him of sacrificing his soul for success, of giving in to the commercial pressures of the art world. He had read enough. The criticism stung, but what hurt more was the feeling that she wasn't entirely wrong. For days, Marcus couldn't bring himself to paint. The canvases in his studio stood untouched, the brushes abandoned, the paint drying on the palettes. He felt disconnected from his own work, as if the very thing that had once been his voice was now nothing more than an empty echo. He had built his career on the foundation of raw, unfiltered expression, and now, it seemed as if he was being punished for it. The decision he had faced before, the choice between maintaining his artistic integrity and embracing the commercial side of his success, had never been more urgent. Claire's review had cracked open the dam of his doubts, and now the flood of uncertainty was overwhelming him. Was she right? Had he lost his way? Days turned into weeks, and Marcus found himself drowning in a sea of conflicting emotions. He met with his manager, his agents, his collaborators, all of them eager to keep pushing forward, to capitalize on his newfound fame. Every conversation seemed to revolve around contracts, numbers, and future exhibitions. No one asked him how he was feeling. No one seemed to care about the artist behind the work. His phone continued to buzz, but the messages felt hollow. Invitations to gala events, interviews with magazines, collectors offering more money than he had ever seen in his life, it was all there, just within his reach. It was the dream he had once envisioned, but now it felt like a cage, slowly closing around him. Sophia, the gallery owner who had stood by him from the beginning, was the only one who seemed to understand the weight he was carrying. One afternoon, she called him, her voice full of concern. "You're not okay, are you?" she asked. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Marcus stood by the window in his studio, gazing out at the city below. "I don't know what's real anymore. Everything feels artificial. Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not." Sophia's tone softened. "I know you're struggling. I've seen it before with other artists. The fame, the pressure, it can change you. But Marcus, you've always had something different. You've got to remember why you started. You're not just painting to make a name for yourself. You're painting to say something." Her words hit him like a revelation. The truth was that he had always painted for himself. It wasn't about fame or fortune, it had never been about that. It was about finding truth, expressing the things that words couldn't capture. But in the rush to succeed, he had lost sight of that. That night, Marcus returned to his studio. The space felt different now. It was no longer the sacred place where he had poured out his soul. It had become a battleground, a place where the art world's expectations and his own desires collided. But tonight, he needed to find a way to reconcile the two. He needed to rediscover the purpose that had once fueled him. He walked over to the blank canvas that had been sitting untouched for weeks. The silence in the room was deafening, but slowly, the familiar rhythm of his thoughts returned. He picked up a brush, dipped it into the paint, and began to work. It wasn't easy at first. His hand felt stiff, the movements mechanical. But as he painted, something started to shift inside him. The colors bled together in a way that felt raw, chaotic, and yet beautiful. For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt connected to his work again. The painting was an abstract piece, lines, shapes, and colors tangled together in a way that felt like a representation of his inner turmoil. It was messy, disjointed, and completely imperfect, but it was real. It was a reflection of his struggle, his anger, and his confusion. He stepped back, looking at the painting with a sense of both satisfaction and uncertainty. This was the art he had always wanted to create, honest, vulnerable, and unfiltered. But he also knew that this piece would never fit into the neat, polished galleries he had been working with. It wouldn't be the type of work that would sell for millions. And that was okay. The next morning, Marcus went to see Sophia. When she opened the door to her gallery, she could see the change in him immediately. His eyes were clearer, the weight he had been carrying lifted slightly. "I painted last night," he said quietly, as if the words were still settling in his mind. "I painted something real." Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Show me." He led her to his studio, where the painting sat on the easel. As Sophia looked at it, she was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She could see the rawness in the piece, the emotion that poured from it. It was unlike anything he had done before. This is your truth," Sophia said softly. "It's messy, it's chaotic, but it's you. It's the real you." Marcus nodded. "I don't know if anyone will want it. It's not marketable. But it's all I have left." Sophia smiled gently. "I think you'll be surprised. This is what makes art powerful, when it's real. Don't let anyone tell you what you should create. You've already proven that you can be successful. Now, it's time to prove that you can be authentic, too." As Marcus left the gallery that day, he felt lighter. The pressure was still there, but it no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had a choice. He could continue down the path of commercial success, but at the cost of his soul. Or he could choose to take a different road, one where he was free to create, free to be himself, no matter the consequences. And so, he made a decision. The days following Marcus's decision felt like a slow exhale. For the first time in what seemed like forever, he didn't feel suffocated by the expectations of the art world. The pressure, while still present, had begun to dissipate. He had made a choice, and with that choice came a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. Marcus spent the next few weeks working tirelessly in his studio. The pieces he created were raw, unrefined, and full of emotion. There was no concern for marketability, no thought about how they would be received by critics or buyers. Each brushstroke was an act of reclamation, a way for him to reconnect with the artist he had once been, before the contracts, the galleries, and the constant pressure to succeed. Sophia, who had been a constant source of support, was one of the first to see his new work. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Marcus would truly return to his roots. And when she saw the pieces he had been creating, she was overwhelmed. These are incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is what you've always been capable of. This is who you are." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't the satisfied smile of someone who had achieved success. It was the smile of someone who had rediscovered something far more important, his own voice. "I'm not sure what's going to happen with these," he said quietly. "But I know that I'm proud of them. And that's all that matters." Despite his newfound peace, the art world wasn't so easily ignored. His former gallery, the one that had helped him gain exposure, reached out to him with an offer for his next exhibition. But Marcus wasn't interested in their polished, commercialized approach anymore. He wanted to do things his own way, even if it meant breaking away from the traditional route. Sophia understood. She had always believed in Marcus's authenticity, and she was ready to support him no matter what. Together, they planned a new kind of show, one that would be about the art, not the business. It would be intimate, personal, and unpolished. The pieces would speak for themselves, and the audience would come not to be dazzled by a display of wealth or prestige, but to experience the raw emotion of Marcus's work. The night of the exhibition, Marcus stood at the door of the venue, watching as people began to trickle in. It wasn't a large crowd, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that these people had come because they wanted to see something real, something that spoke to the heart. The gallery was small, the walls lined with his new pieces. The lighting was soft, casting a gentle glow over the paintings, but there was no need for the usual bells and whistles of a high-end show. The paintings themselves were enough. As people moved through the gallery, Marcus could hear their whispered comments, their reactions. Some of them were familiar faces from his past exhibitions, the collectors, the critics, but there were others, regular people, lovers of art who had heard about the show through word of mouth. It was a different crowd, one that appreciated the art for what it was, not for how much it was worth. Sophia stood beside him, her eyes scanning the room. "You did it," she said softly. "You took back your art. And you've made it yours again." Marcus nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a small knot of uncertainty in his stomach. This wasn't a world where success was measured in financial gain or prestige. It was a world where validation came from within, from knowing that his work had resonated with people on a deeper level. And that, in many ways, was enough. As the evening wore on, a few familiar faces approached him, old friends, colleagues, even a couple of high-profile collectors. They all had their own opinions about his new direction, some of them supportive, others more skeptical. But Marcus was ready for whatever came next. One of the first to approach him was Thomas Avery, the collector who had been one of the driving forces behind his early success. He studied Marcus's work with a thoughtful gaze before speaking. "I see you've changed your approach," he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "This is a far cry from the work we showcased before." Marcus smiled, his gaze steady. "It's me. All of it. Just, more honest." Thomas nodded slowly. "I can respect that," he said. "But you'll have to understand, Marcus, the market might not be as kind to this direction as it was to your earlier work." Marcus's heart didn't race at the mention of the market anymore. He had stopped caring about what was expected of him. "I'm not in this for the market. I'm in it for the art. And that's enough for me." The exhibition continued, and as the night wore on, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. It wasn't about the crowds or the offers. It was about something deeper, the connection he felt with the people who truly understood his work. And for the first time in a long while, he felt whole again. Later that evening, as the gallery began to wind down and the last of the guests trickled out, Marcus stood alone in the center of the room, looking around at the paintings that surrounded him. There was no more doubt in his mind. He had made the right choice. In the days that followed, Marcus received a flood of messages and offers, some positive, some negative, but all of them rooted in his new direction. The reviews came in, some praising his courage, others questioning whether his work could still appeal to the mainstream. But Marcus no longer cared about fitting into a mold. His art was his own again, and that was all that mattered. And then, out of the blue, he received an offer from one of the biggest auction houses in the world. They wanted to feature his new work, the raw, unfiltered pieces that had defined his latest collection. The bidding would be fierce, the stakes higher than ever before. For a moment, Marcus considered the offer. He could return to the world of high-end galleries, the fame, the money, the recognition. It would be a return to the very thing that had once consumed him. But then he remembered the feeling of freedom he had experienced at his exhibition. He remembered the connection with the people who truly saw him, the ones who had come not to buy, but to experience something real. With a quiet smile, he declined the offer. The path ahead was uncertain, but Marcus was no longer afraid. He had chosen authenticity over fame, truth over success. And in that choice, he had found something far more valuable than money or prestige, he had found himself. As the months passed, Marcus's career continued to evolve. He found new ways to connect with his audience, using his platform to promote not just his art, but the values that had always mattered to him. He built a community of artists, critics, and collectors who shared his passion for real, unfiltered expression. He never forgot the lessons he had learned, that true success isn't about fitting in or meeting the expectations of others. It's about staying true to who you are, even when the world tells you to be something else. And as he stood before a new canvas, ready to create once again, Marcus knew that no matter what came next, he was exactly where he was meant to be. After the success of the exhibit, Marcus found himself standing at the crossroads of his future. The gallery had been a turning point, not just in his career, but in his personal life. As the weeks passed, he settled into a new routine, one where the pressure to conform to the art world's standards didn't dictate his every move. Instead of constantly chasing the approval of critics and collectors, he now sought out those who truly resonated with his work, those who could see beyond the surface. But even with all the positive changes, Marcus still wrestled with doubts. There were moments when he questioned whether he had made the right decision, whether the authenticity he was striving for would ever be enough to sustain him. It was a quiet evening in his studio, the kind of evening where the world outside felt distant and unreachable. Marcus stood before a blank canvas, brush in hand, unsure of what to create next. He had come a long way from the young boy kicked out of class for drawing too much. That boy would have never imagined that one day he would be standing in a studio, free to paint whatever his heart desired. And yet, there was still a piece of him that felt like he was walking on uncertain ground, unsure of where the next step would lead. The sound of a knock on the door broke his concentration, and he turned to see Sophia entering, her presence a welcome reminder of the journey they had been on together. "You look lost in thought," she said, her smile gentle but knowing. "I am," Marcus replied, setting down the brush. "I'm trying to figure out what comes next. I've got so many ideas, but I don't know where to start." Sophia studied him for a moment before speaking. "Maybe you're overthinking it. You've always created from the heart. Don't let the world or anyone else make you second-guess that." He nodded slowly, her words resonating deep within him. "I know, but it's hard sometimes. There are days when I feel like I'm still trying to prove something, prove that I'm not just the kid who was kicked out of class, or the one who made it big by selling out. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough." Sophia stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, you've already proven yourself. You don't need anyone's approval anymore. You've earned the freedom to create however you want, to be whoever you want to be. Don't let the past or the fear of failure stop you from continuing your journey." Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him at her words. Sophia had been the one constant in his life, the one person who had believed in him when others doubted. She had seen the artist in him long before anyone else had. And now, it was time for Marcus to truly see himself. Over the next few weeks, Marcus immersed himself in his work once more. This time, however, he approached it differently. He didn't try to conform to any expectations. Instead, he let himself explore, free from the pressure to succeed or to be anything other than what he was. His art began to shift in subtle ways. He found himself drawing from the memories of his childhood, the challenges he had faced growing up, the feeling of being overlooked and misunderstood. But now, instead of painting from a place of hurt or anger, he painted from a place of healing. The colors were brighter, the lines more fluid, and the themes more expansive. It was in these new pieces that Marcus began to see the full scope of his growth. His art had always been a reflection of his journey, but now, it was a celebration of everything he had overcome. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer held him back. Instead, it had become a part of the tapestry of who he was. One of the new pieces was a large, sweeping landscape, an abstract representation of a city skyline, but with an energy that felt alive, pulsing with color. It wasn't a depiction of the world as it was, but rather, how Marcus had come to see it. It was vibrant, full of possibility, and yet, still layered with complexity. It was both familiar and new. It felt like the next chapter of his life. When Sophia saw the piece, she was speechless for a moment, her eyes wide with awe. "This is incredible, Marcus. It's different. But it's you. You found your voice again, haven't you?" Marcus nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "Yeah. I think I have." But the world was never far from Marcus. With success came new challenges. The auction houses, the art critics, and even the collectors who had been initially skeptical now began to take notice of his latest work. It wasn't the kind of art that would fetch millions, but it was real, and that was enough for Marcus. His gallery was still there, but he no longer needed their validation to feel successful. The art world tried to mold him again, offering him opportunities that came with strings attached, but Marcus had learned that the true value of his work lay not in its price tag, but in its ability to connect with people. One day, a well-known collector approached him after an exhibition. "Marcus," the man said, "we're interested in showcasing some of your pieces at our private show. It'll be a big opportunity for you, a chance to make a name for yourself internationally." Marcus thought about it for a moment. The old him might have jumped at the opportunity, eager to secure his place in the art world's upper echelons. But now, after all he had been through, he knew better. "I appreciate the offer," Marcus said, his voice steady. "But I'm not looking for validation anymore. I've already made a name for myself. What I'm creating now is about something deeper. It's about honesty, not prestige." The collector's face fell slightly, but he nodded, respecting Marcus's decision. As Marcus walked away from the conversation, he realized that this was the first time in his life he had truly felt free. Free to be the artist he wanted to be, without the pressure to meet anyone's expectations. Months passed, and Marcus's new direction continued to resonate with those who appreciated the deeper, more authentic side of his work. His exhibitions were smaller now, more intimate, but they felt more meaningful than ever. His audience had changed too. They were not just collectors, but everyday people who had found something in his art that spoke to their own experiences. He was still making a living from his art, but the financial gain no longer felt like the ultimate goal. Instead, it was the connections he made with others, the conversations sparked by his paintings, and the ability to touch people's lives in a way that transcended monetary value. One evening, as he stood at his studio window, watching the sunset over the city, Marcus felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. His journey hadn't been easy, but it had been his own. He had taken the long road to find his truth, and now, he was walking it with confidence. The world would always try to tell him who he should be, what he should create, and how he should live. But Marcus knew that, in the end, it was his own voice that mattered most. And as long as he stayed true to that, he had everything he needed. The months that followed brought a profound sense of clarity to Marcus. His art, no longer confined by the pressures of commercial success or critics' expectations, began to thrive in ways he hadn't anticipated. The quiet galleries, the intimate exhibitions, and the personal connections with people who truly appreciated his work had become his new world, and in that world, Marcus had finally found peace. But the unexpected turn of events came when a major museum reached out to him with an invitation to showcase his art in a permanent exhibit. It was an honor, a rare opportunity for any artist, let alone one who had once been pushed to the edge of obscurity. The museum had recognized the power and depth of his work, and they wanted to share it with a global audience. At first, Marcus hesitated. The museum was renowned, its exhibits attended by thousands of visitors. It was, in many ways, the pinnacle of the art world, the very place he had once aspired to be. Yet, now, after everything he had been through, he was unsure. Was this still the dream he had worked toward? Or was it yet another chance for the world to put him in a box? Sophia, ever the voice of reason, was the first to see the uncertainty in his eyes. They were sitting in his studio, looking at a blank canvas together, when she brought it up. "Marcus," she said softly, "you don't have to decide today, but you've been offered something that many artists dream of. A place in the history of art itself. It's okay to want that. It doesn't mean you've lost yourself." Marcus let the words linger, taking them in. He had always been told that success was defined by recognition, by the validation of the very world that had pushed him down for so long. He had fought for his art, fought for his voice, and now here he was, on the verge of possibly stepping back into that very world. "I just don't want to lose what I've found," Marcus said quietly. "I've spent so long trying to be something I wasn't, to fit into a mold. I'm not sure if I can ever go back to that. I don't want my art to become something that's just, for show." Sophia smiled, her eyes full of understanding. "It's not about what they want. It's about what you do with it. You don't have to give up who you are to take that next step. You've already proven that the world can't define you. But maybe now, you can redefine what success looks like, on your terms." Marcus spent the next few days reflecting on everything he had learned. His journey from the boy kicked out of class for drawing too much to the artist he had become had been anything but linear. It had been filled with triumphs, failures, doubts, and moments of profound growth. He had learned that success didn't have to come from the outside, it could come from within, from staying true to one's purpose, even when the world didn't understand. The museum's offer was tempting, but it wasn't the same kind of temptation it had once been. He no longer craved the validation, the fame, or the recognition. What he craved now was the opportunity to create, to keep pushing boundaries and exploring new forms of expression. If this museum could allow him to do that, to showcase his work in a way that stayed true to his vision, then maybe it was worth considering. One morning, Marcus sat down at his desk, his fingers poised over the keys. The decision was his to make. Slowly, he typed a response to the museum. He accepted their offer, but on his own terms. He would show his work as it was, raw and unfiltered. No commercial compromises. No expectations. Just his art, presented in its truest form. When the email was sent, a strange sense of calm washed over him. He had made the right choice, a choice that honored both the artist he had become and the journey that had brought him there. The exhibit opened a few months later, and as expected, the response was mixed. Some critics praised his authenticity, calling it a bold statement in a world that often celebrated superficial beauty over substance. Others were less kind, calling his work too raw, too emotional, too difficult to understand. But Marcus wasn't fazed. The reviews no longer held the weight they once did. As the exhibit continued, visitors from all over the world came to see his pieces. The museum buzzed with people who were curious, who wanted to understand the story behind the art. Some saw the chaos in the brushstrokes and the rawness of the colors as a reflection of the struggles Marcus had overcome. Others saw something deeper, the story of a man who had refused to let the world define him, who had turned his pain into power. And in the midst of all of it, Marcus finally understood that he had achieved something far greater than fame or financial success. He had found his voice. He had created art that mattered, art that spoke to people on a level beyond the surface. One evening, as the exhibit was winding down, Marcus stood in front of his favorite piece, a massive, abstract portrait of a figure reaching out from the canvas. It was a reflection of his journey, the struggles, the growth, and the triumphs. It had taken him years to get to this point, but now, he could finally say he was proud of the person he had become. Sophia joined him, standing quietly by his side. They looked at the painting together, both of them lost in thought. "You did it," she said softly. "You've come full circle." Marcus smiled, a mixture of relief and pride in his eyes. "Yeah, I did. And it's all because I never gave up on myself." As the museum lights dimmed and the crowd thinned, Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude. The boy who had been kicked out of class for drawing too much had found his place in the world. But more than that, he had learned that the real victory wasn't in the applause, the recognition, or the money, it was in the journey, in the quiet moments of creation, and in the strength to stay true to oneself. And with that, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?